Hello and welcome to Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutchin, political editor of the Daily Record, joined this week by two comrades, John Ferguson, who's the editor of the Sunday Mail, and of course, the ever-present Douglas Dickey of the Scottish Daily Express. So it shows how crazy politics is that the Holyrood election already seems like ancient history. We're planning to mull over it at length, and we will later on, but there is another story in town. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, looks like he's going to be mounting a leadership challenge against the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. We're talking on Wednesday afternoon, and it's rumoured that he's going to resign as Health Secretary on Thursday and then try and get the nominations and signatures in order to force a contest. So, John, this has been rumoured for a while. It seems like the summer of splits and divisions in Labour is going to become a reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think for over a year, you'll be more than aware there's been a sort of expectation that the local elections in England and the Scottish and Welsh elections would be a kind of moment of truth for Keir Starmer's leadership. At the Sunday Mail, we sort of expected that thought it was highly likely we could be reporting in the Prime Minister's departure on Sunday's paper. That didn't happen, but it does look like he's fighting an unstoppable force now of resignations and MPs calling for him to go, and that Wes Streeting feels like it's now or never. But it's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks. It looks likely that Wes is going to stand against him. Question then will be internally whether Angela Rayner, perhaps even Ed Miliband, also decide to go for it. And then the really big unknown is whether Andy Burnham, the Manchester mayor, can force a by-election somewhere and get into the races, win it, and then get into the races as well. I don't know. I think I don't think that Keir Starmer's performed well. I don't think he's a natural Prime Minister. I do think that there is a fundamental instability to British politics at the moment, which Keir Starmer's been a victim of, and actually, the Tories were a victim of before him. I don't think it's good for anyone that this exists, that we don't seem to be able to keep one Prime Minister in place for more than a couple of years. And I don't think that a change of leadership is going to really change that. I'm also not sure that Wes Streeting is the answer. I think that he's very connected to Peter Mandelson affair, very connected generally to the right wing of the Labour Party, where Keir Starmer eventually seemed to gravitate into. It's difficult to see how a lurch to the right of the party is what's going to save them at this juncture. It'll be very interesting whether Starmer seems to be saying at the moment he would like to, if there is a leadership challenge, that he will stand in it. I suspect he could possibly beat Wes Streeting if that was to happen. And the big unknown really is Andy Burnham and whether he can make this journey back into Westminster.
It seems too many obstacles for him to get onto the ballot. Burnham, not only say someone stands down and then there's a by-election. I don't think there's any easy by-election win for Labour across the UK anywhere, and having to get back into it in time to get on the ballot, it just seems very difficult.
I think that's right, but I think if he could pull it off, winning a by-election, then I think it would stand him in very good stead to win a leadership race and become Prime Minister.
At Westminster, I think he would be the favourite, even if Starmer was on the ballot. I think he would win it. It's getting on the ballot, and that's just the roads to getting back to London.
He needs a friend, doesn't he, to stand down, give him his seat, and he needs the Labour NEC to organise a very quick by-election and then he needs to win it. That's the three steps that need to happen, and none of those are easy.
Do you not think, Doug, that right now it doesn't look good for the Prime Minister, but say Wes Streeting does manage to get the nominations, forces a contest, and automatically the Labour leader is one of the candidates. That's the rule. It could end up emboldening Starmer Much like, I think it was the contest between Corbyn and Owen Smith a few years ago. Corbyn won it by miles when he was challenged as the sitting leader. Labour members and trade union members might just feel an instinctive loyalty to Starmer. They might feel like he's been harshly treated, that it's all the media's fault. And perhaps it's in their DNA to stick with the current guy.
Yeah, and I also think, Wes Streeting is a really underwhelming, regardless of his politics, he feels a bit like Starmer light in some ways. He's just the same kind of robotic personality. And, if it was someone like Andrew Rayner going for it, for example, there'd be clear water, in terms of not just their politics, but also their kind of personalities. Andrew Rayner's a big personality. Wes Streeting just doesn't strike me as that type.
I disagree. I think he's the best communicator in the cabinet. And I remember I interviewed him in Glasgow, maybe March time. I was impressed with him. I just thought he was more, in terms of his communication skills, he's in his different league to the Prime Minister. I mean, I think the Prime Minister's got integrity, but in terms of setting out a positive vision of the country, I think Streeting would do that better. Now, as John says, he's got baggage, the links to Mandelson, all the rest of it. But people slag off the New Labour wing of the party. The New Labour wing did win 3 elections in a row.
Do you think a better communicator is enough?
Yeah, I think you have to have a vision to communicate.
Yeah,
and I think that from his perspective, it would be about public service reform, a much closer relationship with Europe, and probably trying to make the case for managed immigration in a way that the Blue Labour wing would not do at all. So I think he'd probably be an improvement on the Prime Minister. That's not exactly difficult. In terms of where we are just now, because let's face it, Starmer's poll ratings are just catastrophic. He is not going to be the leader at the next general election. So it is a question of when he goes rather than if. I think that from Streeting's perspective, he either goes early or he should just forget about it, because the longer it goes on, the more chance Burnham's got of getting back to Westminster. And if he's in the contest, he's going to win it. I think from Streeting's perspective, though, I think his problem is that even if there's an early contest, someone from the soft left, if they sense that Streeting is going to win, will mount a challenge as well. And that would either be Rayner or Ed Miliband. So he's not going to have it easy.
No, I wonder if we could see a kind of left field, not left wing, but left field candidate, someone who could maybe act as a unifier. Right now, the feeling I get from Streeting when I watch him, and I say this as someone who's not, who's in the kind of mechanics issue. I've never interviewed him, but when I watch him on TV, the feeling I get from people on social media is that Wes Streeting is very much in it for Wes Streeting. That is a feeling. That is the feeling that people have about him. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's certainly the vibe that he gives off, and I think he'd be quite a divisive candidate. And I just wonder if someone else might come in. You guys might know kind of better than me if there might be someone that Labour could turn to, because for me, the Prime Minister's toast. It cannot go on like this. But at the same time, the only thing that seems to be keeping him in is that people don't want to have I think it'd be a 5th Prime Minister in 10 years or something. We're basically turning into like Italy without the weather and the food. There has been this incredible churn, but for me, the argument that, oh no, we can't keep chopping and changing the manager, if that's the best you've got, then you've kind of already lost the argument. He's kind of already lost the room. And for every person signing a letter to say that he should stay, there's one signing a letter to say he should go. And whether that gets him over, to a certain level, it's just not a united team. And all of a sudden we're almost 2 years out from that general election. It's a complete omnishambles that he's found himself
let's say if Keir Starmer leads them into the election, Farage is going to be the next Prime Minister. So
a mile,
what are they waiting on? I mean, they don't have to have a new leader overnight. They don't have to have a new leader by the beginning of the summer. But I think that in terms of the Labour conference,
the sooner the better.
Yes, and one argument against Streeting is that, are Labour really going to appoint another male leader? I mean, they've never had a female leader in their history. I think the counter to that would be times are so tough. You need the best person in the job, and if the best person is Wes Streeting, then they should go for him. But Starmer's days are numbered.
I think one of the didn't really get much attention at the time, but I thought that one of the most insightful things that I heard over the sort of Peter Mandelson scandal was from John McDonnell, who said that Labour really need to have an internal inquiry into Labour Together and what this internal pressure group's been up to over the last 10 years within the party, and the way that they've been involved in selecting MPs and getting rid of leaders and putting new leaders in place and where they're funded from and all the rest of it. And if they don't do that, then you can change the leader, but really you're not going to change the overall culture of the party and the things that are getting them into one scandal and screw up after another. Is that there is a clear link between the appointment of Peter Mandelson and a lot of the policy decisions that have gone down absolutely terribly, and this pressure group within the party that it seems to have had a unbelievable hold over things for quite some time. Morgan McSweeney, all the rest of it. I think an interesting thing is that a lot of the people who now want to see Starmer replaced with Streeting are the kind of people who are Morgan McSweeney loyalists and who are unhappy that he was thrown under the bus a few weeks ago. I don't think it bodes well for his chances. That it seems to me that it's that wing of the party that wants Streeting rather than someone who would represent a more fundamental change.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's just I feel a bit like Streeting is just Starmer-esque under a slightly different. Maybe he's a better communicator, or
it's
not whether
not
it's going to change the direction. At the same time, we talk about alerts to the right's not going to get them out to it. I'm not convinced alerts to the left's going to get them out of it either. But the problem is now they're getting eaten at from both sides. Reformer nibbling for the right, and now you've got.
Well, they have to be clear what they want to achieve.
Yeah, and
whoever the next Prime Minister is, if it's a Labour, I think one of the first things they should look at doing is a partial reverse of that national insurance cut, because if it really is about economic growth, I mean, this Labour government has had the foot on the brakes of economic growth while saying that it's their top priority. I would look at that. Also, if people look at Westminster with a sense of revulsion and disgust, they see it as a place of cronyism, of nepotism. Why would the next Labour leader not just say, we're going to get rid of the House of Lords, make it fully elected, stop that sort of revolving door of cronyism that scars British politics? Put yourself on the side of renewal and reform. Don't just be the next guy that's up for business as usual, which is what Starmer did. I mean, to his shame, he ditched that Gordon Brown blueprint for constitutional reform, basically argued that it's a sort of second term thing.
And it's interesting to see how Brown now kind of being brought back into the fold. Always seems like there's a acceptance that actually the Brown wing of the party, rather than the more Blairite Mandelson wing, is probably the one that will resonate with voters and the wider Labour membership more.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that was a panic move. I mean, you look at the job he's been given. I mean, what does it actually mean in practice? I think it's about trying to persuade people to be loyal to Starmer.
Yeah, I think
but speaking of Scottish Labour, we'll come to the election in a moment. Yet again, the focus is on Westminster UK Labour madness. Doug, do you not think that this is just another reason for an independent Scottish Labour Party?
Yeah, I seen your tweet about it, Paul. I don't. I actually think for once Anis Sarwar's probably quite happy that all the focus is at Westminster, because it's kind of taken over from his his own dire campaign. I kind of flip-flop on this. Way back when Murdo Fraser suggested the same thing for the Tories back in 2011, it might have been 2010, 2011. I thought it was quite a good idea because the Tories were so toxic up here. Yeah, I've always felt there was a kind of silent centre-right, a big proportion of the country is conservative with a small c. But then I kind of also wonder, are Labour that toxic yet? The whole point of the Labour movement is that it's a kind of, a pan-British movement, and it's.
You raise a very
I'm
good
not
point, actually.
convinced that you know, drawing borders from a Labour point of view is really what that party should be about.
But here's the thing. So you're right that, see, when you ask Scots about Conservative policies, they poll better than when you bring the Tories into it. So that is a toxic brand. I do feel like Labour is heading that way. I mean, I spoke to so many voters during the Holyrood election, and the Labour brand is toxic. I mean, it is just, you might say that's down to Starmer, but even their general election victory, there was no love for the Labour Party. People in Labour love the Labour Party. No one else does. And if you're serious about winning elections, you really have to look at the whole thing from top to bottom. Why not have like a new name, new party that's got very few ties to a toxic UK parent?
I think if you have a new name and break all ties, is that still the Scottish Labour Party, or is that something?
Does it have to be called the
something
Scottish Labour
completely
Party?
different?
I mean,
I think that's what it take. When you first introduced the question, I thought you were going to say, "Is it not time for an independent Scotland rather than an independent Scottish
independent
Labour
Scotland
Party?"
can still be pro-UK, but it doesn't need to be called the Scottish Labour
I
Party.
think it's a really interesting idea of changing both the name and breaking away from the UK party. It kind of feels like just creating a whole new centre-left party.
Look at what Macron did in France. Why can't that happen in
That's
Scotland?
the first question. Just in terms of change it to become independent from the UK party. I know this has been suggested by a lot of people, and I'm not so sure that your average voter really has a deep enough understanding of what the sort of technical relationship between Scottish Labour and UK Labour is at the moment. And I don't think if they were to break away, that the SNP or would stop attacking them along those lines unless there was a genuine, complete policy diversion. So,
which is what I'm arguing for. I mean, to play devil's advocate, you're saying that people would still attack them. Scots just do not make a distinction between Scottish and UK Labour. They just don't. It's just one and the same thing. So that works when the UK party is doing well, as they did in the general election. Scottish Labour does well. When the UK Labour Party is tanking, as they did last week, Scottish Labour tanks as well. So, I mean, if people in Scottish Labour are happy with that arrangement, then they're effectively, in 2031, they're just waiting for a more favourable UK political environment and hoping to capitalise on that.
I tell you, I think would be very happy with it. The Scottish independence fans, and that's not even to say the SNP. They would politically, they could feel there was a threat there. But I think if you were to have a new party that was replacing Scottish Labour, which was a genuinely Scottish entity, i.e., really its allegiances to the Scottish Parliament, and you've got the SNP, you've got the Greens. It means that you've got three parties who are all in favour of Scottish, or who are all genuinely Scottish-based and controlled parties. I think that would be seen by many as one more step down a gradualist kind of path to independence.
I think it definitely risks playing out the hands of the Nationals, because because right away I'm thinking what the SNP attack line are going to be that the UK government is so toxic that even its Scottish party doesn't want anything to do with it. And I'm not convinced.
It is an argument.
And I'm not convinced, that that's a relevant argument or a particularly good argument, but it's an argument that they would make. And I think John's right that it creates this image again of Scotland. One of the great tricks the SNP has pulled, I think, is convincing quite a lot of people that Scotland's already pretty much independent, and that we're already a separate country. And I think this would aid them in that illusion.
I know that they wouldn't appreciate the comparison, but you take the DWP. No one could dispute their unionism, but they're a fully independent party that they would argue stands up for the people in Northern Ireland. It is totally possible you could have a centre-left equivalent in Scotland. None written in the stars that you couldn't have it. It's a very difficult thing to do. I would just say to people in Scottish Labour, what is more important to you, actually winning a Holyrood election or solidarity with a UK party? If it's the latter, stick with the status quo. and then you're going to have a very, very small chance of ever winning a Holyrood election. But if you want to beat the SNP, they can't just repeat what they've been doing for the last 5 elections. I mean, they're going backwards at every single election since 1999.
It would create a situation where there would need to be an understanding that this was a new independent party which would always stand with the Westminster, their Westminster brothers and sisters when it came to selecting a Prime Minister. Which I think if you're going to have a completely different name, then it's...
Listen, I know it's messy. I know it's messy, but I think it's worth having the debate.
It's an interesting question.
So look, let's go back to the Holyrood election result, which, seems like about 150 years ago, given events at Westminster today. John, the SNP won it pretty comfortably, but they fell short of that IndyRef2 trigger of 65 seats. That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say they fell short of that trigger. I don't really think it ever was a trigger. I think it was a
campaigning tool.
Well, I don't even think it was a very good campaigning tool. It was like when you're going to win something, why set yourself a new sort of line for success, which is a little bit unattainable, and then fail to achieve it when you know that I don't think that a second referendum would have been happening whether or not there was a independence, whether SNP won a majority. It would have made a strong argument, and it would have kind of illuminated a democratic injustice for a lot of people. But I don't think you needed to set that bar for that to be the case. But yeah, irrespective of that, the SNP won an extremely commanding victory. I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that if Scotland had the same voting system as the UK, then our parliament would be almost an embarrassing sight. It would be like China, but by choice. You would have pretty much one party with how many? Another 3 or 4?
57.
Three or four.
Obviously, we'd have smaller,
MSPs.
constituencies.
It'd be like the old Glasgow Council, but it was run by Labour.
So I do think that it almost highlights a flaw in the idea of devolution. If you create this parliament and you say, we're never going to let you actually legislate to become an independent country, but you've got a party in there which is a Scottish National Party, i.e. they will always fight for more resources from the Westminster entity, which by and large is responsible for raising money, and the Scottish Parliament is responsible for spending it, then it doesn't strike me as that odd that people will generally come round to the conclusion that the best party to vote for is the Scottish National Party, that even if they screw a lot of things up and are quite incompetent, well, so is everyone else, but they are going to fight for the most resources. And I mean,
why do you think
it's going to be a quarter of a century now the SNP have been in power. It's kind of is looking like a one-party state, and that I don't know, feels like something needs to give, and I'm not sure
you're
what
right,
that
though.
thing
The
is.
perception of the SNP is that they stand up for Scotland and they fight for resources. The good question would be, have they actually been successful in that fight? I remember the first 2 terms of Labour and the Lib Dems. One of the most transformative policies was stock transfer in Glasgow, where the Gordon Brown-led Treasury effectively wiped out Glasgow housing debt. Now, it wasn't really a fight, but it was a successful negotiation of resources. Has the SNP, even though they do fight hard for Scotland, have they actually won any battles with the UK government?
I think John's made this argument a few times here, and I think he's right that about the perception of, that the SNP will fight for everything, but I don't think they'd fight any more than any other party in power would. And I think, Paul, you're absolutely spot on. They're more interested in picking fights with Westminster. This is the point.
I want to win fights, not just pick them.
Yeah, but this is why they've put that price cap in their manifesto, and they say they'll bring it forward within 100 days. It's so they can pick a fight with Westminster. They won't get to, make this policy a reality, and they can turn around and blame, it's, the big bad UK government stopping us from cutting your grocery bills. It's tiresome. And it's been the same over and over and over again, and yet because the constitutional question in enough Scots' mind hasn't been settled yet, they're going to keep winning elections because their
I mean, let's say, John,
support
sorry,
is strong right through the country. They don't have bits and bobs of the country that are kind of SNP heartlands. It's all SNP heartlands now, apart from maybe the south of Scotland.
Swanee won the election without even getting out the second year. I mean, he coasted to victory, didn't really make any mistakes. I mean, I think we said last week that the Jordan Linden scandal was quite uncomfortable at the beginning and then at the end, but I can't really remember any gaffes that he made. I think his experience as a politician showed up in that campaign.
Yeah, he didn't mess anything up, and so he just needed to allow what appears to have been the settled will of the public to play out, and that's where I think that I don't think that it helps the not now, not ever attitude towards a referendum, and that's not an argument for independence. It's just that I think people do look at that and think, how can that be democracy if you've got a parliament that, as I said, if it was first past the post, would be almost entirely a nationalist party, a nationalist parliament, and you have poll after poll for many years now suggesting half the country would like independence, and I think most of them show that it's more than half don't think it's right that you just say you're never having another
Well, I
referendum.
mean, let me try and answer that. So there's a big pro-independence majority in terms of seats. If you look at the votes won, it was pro-UK. The pro-UK parties won it comfortably.
Yeah, but I mean, the seats do matter, and
They
also
do.
if you look at a poll, any recent poll on purely on views on an independent Scotland, they do suggest that basically roughly half of the public.
It doesn't say that
think
it's their
a good
priority,
idea.
though. I mean,
It doesn't say their priority, but it is significant. And I'm not making an argument for independence. What I'm saying is, I think it gives an easy out for people to vote for the SNP, safe in the knowledge that they're never actually going to get what they want, which is the thing that a lot of people think is really quite dangerous. You can vote for the SNP, safe in the knowledge, as I've been arguing, they will fight for more resources, safe in the knowledge that you're not actually going to need to worry about your pension and currency and all these really big, scary questions that would come with the SNP getting to do what they really want to do, which is to break away from the UK.
Do you not think, Doug, though, that it wasn't Scots who gave us a huge pro-independence majority of MSPs? It was the electoral system.
Well, yeah, and that's something that I've written about this week. We've been writing about a fair bit. Obviously, the Holyrood electoral system was supposed to be more representative than Westminster. I think the difference for me is that Westminster's system, for all its flaws, and there are many, and we could discuss that, I'm sure, at the next general election, but it's designed to give you a definitive result, and it usually does. The Holyrood system's designed to be proportionally representative, and it didn't. Now, I think it was, I was listening to Ailsa Henderson on the Sunday show, and she was talking about split ticket voting. People, normally vote for the same party on both ballots, but this year I don't think that happened quite as much.
Yeah, there was a rise.
And we've ended up with a situation where the SNP and Greens have obviously got that pro-independence majority, although I would point out Greens didn't actually think to bother putting a referendum in their manifesto, which I think does undermine John Swinney's argument somewhat. They've ended up with a majority despite only winning about 40% of the vote between them, and I think that's, if Holyrood was set up to be representative of the Scottish people, then I think there's definitely a case that we need to look at electoral reform. It sounds a bit sour grapes, from the Express. Obviously didn't want the SNP to win, but for kind of going with those kind of guiding principles, and I think because we know, because the Supreme Court have told us that the Constitution is a matter reserved for Westminster, I think the UK government can say, look at the popular vote here, and it does give them the right to do that. We talk about what is the trigger going to be. I've been kind of thinking about this because we discuss it on here, and I read an interesting article with is it John Ferry, the Lord Dem fellow, and he was talking about it, about how it needs to be, even before we have a referendum, I think it needs to be the settled will of the people before we even think about having the vote. And right now, as John rightly points out, it's clearly not, because only
Who'd the
half.
referee be of
Well,
a
of course,
of a trigger?
you know, that's maybe another argument, but there's no way that this election was ever going to be a trigger, and certainly John Swinney, you know, winning 58 seats down. I think that's the fourth election out of four that John Swinney's been in charge at SNP, and they've lost seats. Now, it seems churlish calling him that when he's obviously just delivered an incredible win, but at the end of the day, he set himself an unachievable bar, or, well, not an achievable bar, but a really high bar, and he's failed to get there. So, you know, I think quite a lot of people talk about whether Malcolm Offord's going to see 5 years at Holyrood. I think John Swinney will see 5 years at Holyrood. I'm not entirely convinced he'll see 5 years as First Minister.
No, I don't think he'll be First Minister come the Westminster election.
Yeah, because he's
But
going
look, I mean, you're after 19 years to win 58
Yeah,
seats is an incredible achievement.
and
And
you
hats
know,
off to the guy.
I think he'll probably be First Minister until he decides he doesn't want to be. Is the
I mean, he was
impression I get.
already headed for the exit when Hamza Yusuf was First
Yeah,
Minister.
exactly. I think at some point in this Parliament, despite what he said to me in an interview before the election, that he wanted to be the First Minister for another
Forever.
10 years, forever, yeah. And like going on the latest voting
You know,
trends.
actually, I might just go back on something I said there. I said he wouldn't be in charge by the time of the Westminster election. You know, he does have his own personal mandate now, and I think that's a big thing for him.
Yeah,
I do think that he has always felt that he was in the shadow of Alex Salmond and Nicola
Yeah.
Sturgeon. I think he does feel emboldened. So, I mean, I'm not convinced he's going to lead them into the next Holyrood election, but I think he would want a full-ish term under his belt.
I think one of the things, and I don't think people necessarily like see it in along these lines, but I think it's something that comes through in John Swinney's person. One of the things that's attractive about him as a First Minister is that he's someone who genuinely doesn't really want the job entirely. Had to be sort of dry. Like sometimes the worst leaders can be people that really want it. They want the power for power's sake, and they want to be the leader for being the leader's sake. It's about their own ego. And one of the things that's because it's difficult to put your finger on what is it about John Swinney that this time round people seem to like, and he has managed to turn the SNP around and win another election after a couple of really rough years. And I think it is that sense of him that he's someone who is doing something that isn't all about him. Like he genuinely would probably, or he definitely would have rather retired a couple of years ago, but he's come back into it for his party, for the country, and it's about something bigger than him. And
He's a difficult guy to dislike.
Yeah, he is, and I think there is something in that, and what that where his appeal comes from.
I mean, you've obviously not read his interview with Brian Taylor, did you? I mean, I saved the SNP. I mean, show a bit of humility, John. You've just lost seats at an election. I mean, this stuff about the SNP. I did we look back at the opinion poll and the Holyrood opinion poll around about the time John Swinney became SNP leader. You know, let's not rewrite history that here. They weren't doing great, but they were still ahead in the Holyrood polls. They were polling at about 35%. He's not won back swathes. They've lost 400,000 votes.
I mean, they were stumbling from one crisis
they were.
to another.
And I think what John Swinney's done is just not F up, basically. You know, that's
a very difficult thing to do. It would appear in Scottish politics.
And that's all. And he's been helped massively, and he's taken full advantage of the rise of reform, which handed them probably another 10 seats.
Yeah, look, a win's a win, and a big win is a big win.
No, look, you know, I'm sure he doesn't care how he's managed it. But, you know, when you actually dig down, the same way when you dig down into that Labour victory in 2024, it's probably not as spectacular as it appears on first viewing, but ultimately, to the winner goes the spoils. So, you know, he's got something of a mandate to take forward, you know, Swinneyism or whatever that will be. But I don't think we'll be seeing him as First Minister in 2031. I certainly wouldn't get too comfortable with Stephen Flynn behind you, because we know he's shown a real ruthless streak. So I think he's in for quite a difficult few years, John Swinney, actually. I don't think it's going to be easy to navigate it. I don't think there'll be a coalition with the Greens who will feel emboldened themselves to kind of try and push the SNP further to the left. So I think it's going to be, I think he faces quite a tricky task.
It's an interesting question. Who by all accounts, he gets on very well with some of the senior people in the Lib Dems. I think him and Willie Rennie just naturally kind of see eye to eye on quite a lot of things,
I think
not
that
the
would be his preferred
Constitution,
partner.
obviously. So it's going to be interesting to see where I don't think, like you say, there's not going to be a formal deal with anyone, but it's going to be quite interesting to see where they look to make their deals.
More an issue-to-issue basis.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
All right. I think that probably covers it. I mean, just to summarise, the next 5 years, the SNP demand a referendum. UK government says no, rinse and repeat. So that's
and we're back here in 5 years' time.
Exactly. All right. Thanks to Doug and John for joining me, and thanks also to Darryl from the Record video team who produced this episode. You can listen to Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or watch it on the Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single sport.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.